Go.
Mula vinaka, everyone. Bonjour. Hello. My name is Elise Huffer, and you are now joining a session that's going to focus on the place of identity, traditional knowledge, education, heritage, and cultural expressions in conservation and natural resource management. I will be introducing the speakers, the panelists shortly. Just to let you know, the format of this session will be the panelists asking each other questions. There'll be a PowerPoint that will come up that will show the different speakers. But just as a short introduction to this session, if you have been able to read at least part of the 2020 State of Environment and Conservation report, it states in its introduction that Pacific cultures have established relationships with nature that include reliance on local supply chains, respect for the health of wild animals, and controlled access to natural species and spaces. Building on our traditions can increase Pacific resilience for a sustainable future. This is echoed by the Framework on Nature Conservation and Protected Areas 2021-2025, which is also going to be discussed in this conference, and which some of you may have already read. And the framework has a strong focus on the linkages between culture and conservation. Yet, when it comes to the how of integrating culture and traditional knowledge, and particularly cultural expressions into conservation and natural resource management, the conservation sector seems to be somewhat struggling. In today's session, we're going to examine different perspectives about this how dimension. And this will be based on the experience of our panelists. And our objective is really to inspire and propose new ways of approaching conservation that draw on people's well-being, identity, connection to place, traditional, indigenous, and local knowledge, and especially cultural expressions. How do we all know that in the Pacific, much knowledge is passed on through cultural expressions, which are quite diverse: chants, dances, tattooing, body ornamentation, all sorts of ways that knowledge is transmitted. So how do we build on these assets and really make better use of cultural expressions to improve conservation and natural resource management? So as stated, our session today will be an answer and question session led by the panelists themselves. Just a little bit of background on myself. So my name is Elise Huffer. I'm half French, half American, now a Fiji citizen as well. Been in the Pacific for some 30 years. Worked at the Institute of Pacific Studies at the University of the South Pacific, and was culture advisor at the Pacific community for 10 years. Sorry, excuse my dogs in the background. I'm really sorry about that. I tried to quieten them down. I work really in the area of culture and conservation, and I'm the Vice Chair Oceania for the Commission on Environmental, Economic, and Social Policy of IUCN. Right, so that's it from me. And I'm now going to introduce our first two speakers. So there will be a question from Anne Singeo to Mark Steggy. So that's how we're gonna get started. So just very briefly, I'll introduce Anne. Anne is from Palau, and she's the co-founder and executive director of Ibil Society, and works to promote sustainable resource management through innovation and education. Anne has held many management positions in Palau, including in the area of health and gender, and has contributed to a range of publications on culture, indigenous knowledge, and conservation. So that's Anne Singeo, and Anne will be posing a question to Mark Steggy. So I'll introduce Mark briefly. Mark grew up in the Marshall Islands in Hawaii and has studied history, management, and climate change at different universities. He works as a researcher and consultant based in Majuro, and most of his work revolves around the themes of localizing the often externalized role of expert, especially in terms of monitoring ecosystems and related socioeconomic systems to better understand and manage the cultural and natural resources of his country. He's also an elected official for Maloelap Atoll, one of the 24 rural municipalities in the Marshall Islands. He serves on a number of regional and national boards and steering committees in government, utilities, education, and the private sector. So good morning again to everyone, and Anne, over to you.
Thank you, Elise. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for taking part in this session today. Um, Mark, um, you have a vast experience in working on climate change challenges faced in the Marshall Islands. In your experience and from your knowledge of Marshallese traditional knowledge, what is it within the culture that you think can be looked at to help um, be used as a tool utilized to address some of these challenges faced by the Marshall Islands?
Thank you, Anne, and thank you, Elise, and Yahweh, who are logged in today, and we'll be viewing some of the recordings. It is, first of all, a real honor and privilege to be speaking, not only to everyone, but to be speaking and answering Anne's question this morning. So Yahweh, Anne, thank you for that wonderful question. So this is something that, as Elise alluded to in the introduction today, hey Max, that I feel very passionate about. As she alluded to earlier about this role of expert, and I'm not sure if everyone has seen the screen yet. Maybe I just need to adjust what I'm viewing. Here it is. Yeah. Okay. So this role of expert really is kind of at the heart of of how to bring Marshallese traditional practices and norms, and how making that more valued inside the conservation methodology and practice that is oftentimes externalized. A lot of that methodology is often externalized. So that's kind of at the heart of what I'm doing. And to do that first, to kind of start that process along, oftentimes it's good to just ask, what are the most important issues to you? And I guess when I'm using that voice, I'm using the research, the external researcher's voice in asking that question to the community that is the resource owner, whether it be the patch of coral reef or a yellow forest. The resource owners, the locals, who will be the ones who kind of categorize, identify and then kind of prioritize or categorize those list of priority issues for them. We don't want to bring in too much of our own, priorities into the community. We want just to receive what those priorities are. So this slide here that I'm showing is just something that I recently, this is actual data gathered from 3 communities in the north, middle, and southern regions of the Marshall Islands, which is a really big country spread out about the size of Texas. So it takes up a lot of space, and the priorities might shift between them, especially when it comes to climate issues. So we fall right in the right along the southern band of the intertropical convergence zone. And so a lot of the southern islands and atolls get a lot of rain, and the north, much more arid conditions. So you can see some of that teased out in the data, but for the most part, people are really concerned about jobs, and they're really concerned about um, the climate issues that are immediate, the fast onset disasters like drought. And then the slow onset disasters are like sea level rise are becoming much more, 10 years ago, this list would have included sea level rise probably at the very bottom. But with all the wonderful awareness efforts and advocacy work that has been taking place by organizations like SPREP and all the national level partners like MICS, Marshlands Conservation Society. It's been a really good, I think, catch up in terms of level of awareness of what really matters. And this is a big one, climate change. So those, after finding out those important issues, trying to then, craft some really relevant indicators that you notice here on the left. These are just some ideas that I've been toying around with and testing out here in the Marshall Islands. Sorry for the typo. We're still testing it out. And then just, I guess, at the second step after going through that very important initial process of listening, now invest in the people and invest in the nature that is there. A lot of the investments tend to get put into some of the institutions and the capacities that are just not in the community, and that's, I keep as a researcher and as a climate advocate, this is kind of where I see climate change funding and biodiversity funding doing a really good job so far, but it could improve, and bringing some of those investments down to the ground level, and reducing the amount of overhead that continues to diminish the return on what the investment is at the end of the day. Not trying to make any large comments here, just saying that an increase in the proportion of that investment into the local communities is kind of where I'm looking at my work. And if we could go to the next slide, the reason is not only altruistic, but in the next slide you'll see some of I think the reasons are because, again, traditional knowledge is relevant. It improves conservation work. And also because I think some of our bigger issues, like we were raising earlier in the previous slide, regarding, poor education systems, lack of just more social issues, I think they can be addressed through education. And I'm really glad that Anne is going to be speaking later today, because she's a really wonderful and inspiring person to kind of learn from and model some of their work. So what I've done in the Marshalls, just a little bit, I taught some classes here in Marshall's High School, and I was very lucky because they needed a teacher, and I had worked there before as a career counselor and an academic counselor, so I was invited back to just teach some of their earth science classes at the earth science level, so 9th grade. And while I was there, very unfortunately, a colleague and now my uncle, so he passed away, and he was teaching Marshallese language arts. And that class required another teacher to be, to step in. And so they asked me to take some of his sections. So I wound up teaching the same students earth science and Marshallese language arts back to back. And that experience just opened up my eyes. It was in the classroom. It was, unfortunately, MLA didn't have a lot of curriculum materials. So I had to just kind of work on creating it on the fly. And sometimes they did, but it wasn't the content wasn't rigorous or really relevant to what I was trying to teach. It was mostly to know out in the world if they ever left the Marshall Islands. So I'm going to turn off my video if that helps. And so I started learning about climate change in my own spaces. And one of the things that really kind of drew me in was, this idea that pressure gradient forces, as you see in this diagram to the left, has a very strong earth science foundation of how these pressure gradient forces across the globe produce wind. So the very final arrow in that series of arrows is this one that says wind. And you can kind of see how that wind is bending. And that's the Coriolis effect, and the spinning of the world, the globe on its axis is producing that kind of that bend. And all these, very not hard to understand, but it just wasn't getting into our students' learning. They just weren't learning this stuff. And they really need to, especially with the climate future that we're facing. You need to know your earth systems really, really well. So I was thinking of how to do this, and just looking at wave charts and understanding how Marshallese traditional knowledge have utilized refractions on the waves, and the bending of those waves. I think it wound up becoming really relevant for the students. They took interest, and they knew how pressure gradients worked in terms of temperature gradients. When they swam, they would be swimming on the surface of the ocean, and then they would start diving. I think a lot of us have the same experience. You get to a certain point and the water temperature just suddenly gets really cold. And so they understood gradients, and just using those kinds of scaffolding of knowledge that they already have, they started to learn Western scientific concepts a lot more effectively. And I think traditional knowledge has a real important role in not only natural resource management issues, but just our bigger issues that we're facing today. And they build on each other, they help each other fulfill the objectives that we've set out, whether it's conservation, whether it's economic development, whether it's education. We just need more traditional knowledge, I feel. And if we can just click a couple times, I'll touch on one last example of this. So past flood events lead to conservation sites. If we could just kind of click advance the slide a couple times, there's a couple things that'll appear. This is our good friend over in Medjid Island. Medjid is on the northeast quadrant of the Marshall Islands, and after a flooding event that you see here, I just asked him to sit down and using GIS, just kind of plot the flooded area and the direction of the waves that he observed that day. So that information has since been very helpful in communicating to our partners and donors as to why specifically a conservation site, a protected area, right there where the the brunt of the wave would have hit. So that's now being turned into a terrestrial protected area today, with funding and with resources invested into this community. So I think, we could call traditional knowledge, the more kind of ancient type, prehistoric type, or it could be just modern day, just understanding and observing your environment. I think that also is traditional knowledge. The word traditional sometimes gets um, thought of as a very, you know, more ancient type of knowledge. I think it's just last week's weather or the previous week's um, fruiting season. All that I would consider traditional knowledge and very, very relevant to conservation work. So thank you very much, and I'll hand it back to Elise. Como está ahora?
Thank you, Mark, for such a wonderful presentation.
Thanks, Mark. I think the relationship between the traditional wave chart and the temperature gradients is just such a good example of how we can bring these things together much more effectively. So what we're going to do now, and Wouter, we'll just go straight to Mark's question to Anne. Because we're having a few glitches with getting Aunofo on from Tonga. So if you don't mind, we'll just go straight to your question, Mark, and hear from Anne. Thank you.
Sure thing. Anne, what do you think is missing in education today to promote sustainable natural resource management and biocultural diversity? As a second question, what Palauan concepts and practices does your society, the Ibil society, focus on? And how do you transmit these?
Thank you, Mark. We have adopted a curriculum that integrates science and traditional knowledge of Palau, of the natural environment. And we teach that into the schools, the local schools. We have summer programs and as well as research camps for high school kids and college students. So this program has been around since 2005 and have developed into various programs such as our outdoor classroom, which is where we complement the science that they learn in the classroom. We've developed a field experiential study where they get to apply what they've learned in the classroom. And then we have um, programs for older kids in high school and college where they do research, get certified in scuba diving, and we've been doing it for the last 16 years. Can we go to the next slide, please? I think when we started this organization, the question that we were asking amongst ourselves was, how do we teach the young people to take interest in protecting the natural environment of Palau, the biodiversity, the habitats that supports their lives. And we realized that a lot of our kids were drifting away from our natural environment and participating in our cultural events, and were either in a classroom or outside of the classroom looking at the technological devices. And so that was sort of the saying amongst ourselves, is we cannot ask someone to protect what they don't know. And that's how this whole program began. And so what began as a summer program where we bring kids to live with us for a period of 1 to 2 weeks and just throw them into nature, teach them to interact with the natural environment through some cultural lenses. Today has grown to become an international program, and we host students from everywhere around the world, including Palau, of course. Can you go to the next slide? So it is an inquiry-based learning, and that's we have a multitude of outdoor classroom and environmental studies that we provide to all the schools in Palau. And we've created curriculum and field guide that teach Palau's language and culture and science. Um, and with the college programs, uh, we recognize that while we were creating a curriculum to teach Palauan children to reconnect with their natural environment through their culture, we have developed a unique program that is specific to Palau Islands and has a strong base on the natural environment and the culture that have used the resources throughout time. And that had provided a good foundation for research programs for universities around the world. So today we have at least four universities in the US and Asia that um, have conduct annual classes with ABIL. We've developed a program where we have dormitories and science lab, but our biggest science lab is still the ocean and the forest. But this allows our kids to work in familiar environments similar to those in the classroom, but shifting that into the natural environment um, uh, to make a stronger connection and a sense of appreciation and protection. Um, we serve over 1,000 kids every year. Um, when we first started, we were serving at least 30 kids a year. Now the program has grown to that level. Can you go to the next slide? And that's how we teach kids and adults. We do team training or team education. So we have traditional knowledge holders. So you have a woman, a farmer, a cultivator of soil who understands water flow and soil movement, and so taking that woman and together with a earth science a teacher, we teach these children how to um, improve their knowledge on water conservation and soil management. There's fishermen who are working with um, marine biologists to create research programs that allow for us to teach kids about um, fish species, marine species, um, their gender, their maturity, and also the relationship between human and the ocean. We have various research program also in the forest. So we have restoration projects with communities where they restore native forest on degraded land areas, and then we have universities that come in and train on monitoring science monitoring program for in those areas that studies species survivability, productivity, and resilience in difficult areas. We also have artists who teach children how to communicate their what they're feeling and their perception on nature and their culture using art. And we have scuba diving that allows the older kids to explore the underwater of Palau that is mostly known to tourists and less in the Palauan community, and we're trying to increase that. We have fishers who teach net fishing, but in that net fishing is part of a seagrass ecology study, endangered species. As we have so many various programs that we teach, and when we teach in the environment, the very habitat that that lesson is about. And I think that is my last slide. So thank you everyone, and I welcome any questions.
Thanks so much, Anne. But again, a really great example of how to bring in traditional knowledge and practical knowledge, and there's into conservation and really understanding the environment. Like you say, you can't protect what you don't know. So I think these examples really are relevant, particularly in a day and age where we have so many young people who are now in urban areas, or and their connection to nature is becoming, they're tending to lose that connection to nature. Unfortunately, we can't seem to get Aunofo on. Hopefully, she will come on later. So I'm now going to ask the question to Maijolin Kim. Mai, I'm going to introduce you briefly, and then Voter, if you can put the question up, that would be really handy. So I've actually worked with Mai a few times myself. And Mai is from Chuuk in the Federated States of Micronesia. She's a PhD student in Pacific History with the Department of Pacific Affairs at the Australian National University, and she's doing a really, really interesting doctorate that's entitled From Silent to Salient, Re-engaging Local Stories of Chuukese Women. And so she's looking at Chuukese local stories, cultural heritage, indigenous languages, and epistemologies to incorporate women's stories and voices in a gender-inclusive history of Chuuk. And she continues to advocate for the cultural education in empowering women, youth, and community development. And Mai will be answering a question, so I'll ask that. But I just wanted to preface this by saying that this is such important work, because in a lot of what's been written about culture and governance and development and so forth, we sometimes, often we don't hear the voices of women. So Mai's work is really important, and I think it covers all the areas that we're interested in, which is livelihoods, natural heritage, cultural heritage, identity, and so forth. So Mai, if I can ask you the question, as someone who has researched women's culture in Chuuk, what are some of the values and cultural expressions practiced by Chuukese women that can enhance conservation, biodiversity, and natural resource management? And the follow-up question to that is, what would you recommend to the conservation community to foster these values and cultural expressions? Thank you.
Thank you, Elise. Raranim, everyone. Raranim from Chuuk. Before I begin, I'd like to share not so much a poem, but a piece that I've written for the past 5 years, adding and deleting. The title of the piece is Nikopuk Feru, the breast that feeds the land. Nikopuk Feru, the breast that feeds the land. The one who gives birth. She is bearer of the land. She is giver of life. Nikopuk Feru, nurturer, provider, guardian, protector. Nikopuk Feru, heavenly mother. She is eternal goddess, creator of the universe, procreator of life. Nikopuk Feru gave birth to the islands of Chuuk, to the animals and the birds, the plants and the trees, and a surrounding ring of coral to protect all of her creation. Nikopuk Feru She's woman. She's mother, mother of Adang clan, mother of Metse traditional government, mother of Orofis judicial, mother of wisdom, and she is Irabuiro, mother, daughter, sister, daughter, matrilineal family. I share this poem because the poem is based on our creation story, the creation story of Chu, or the islands of Chu, the people, the birth of its people, the birth of its whole environment comes from this woman called Nikobu Fedu, which literally means the breast that feeds, that give birth to the land. Now, I share this because this is our identity here as women. Oftentimes, I say our identity as mothers, and everybody give me the eye. But as a matrilineal society, not everyone has to be a mother in order to be um, to have these characteristics. And I always use this. Um, and I always use this concept as a way to empower women, as a way to empower communities, encourage the work of women, the engagement of women's and their cultural work in governance, in environment conservation, and even in education. So our identity as women is just not limited to women who can give birth, but as a matrilineal society, we're all considered, women are all considered mothers to in a Chukis context, where you're responsible for your land, you're responsible for the ocean, you're responsible for traditional knowledge, you're responsible for that transmission of knowledge and even implementing governance. Um, so not only bearers of our own environment, but we're also guardians, and that then that's where conservation comes in, because women also play a key role in conservation in our societies. So I continue to use this concept as a way to encourage women to participate. A lot of times, what the conservation narrative is usually from a maybe a government perspective or from a development side perspective, not so much from a community perspective, and that's where women are also missing in that narrative or in that context. And so I resort to local stories to re-engage women and say and encourage their participation, because a lot of times there is this concept, there's this modern concept that women need to shy away um, from being on the front line. But also, as if you look into oral history, if you look into our stories, indigenous stories, women are actually responsible, are leading, should be leading a lot of the um, conservation work. So um, women, where women can come in, women come in implementation. Now, a lot of times, like women's role is missing in a lot of the narratives that we currently have, and that's because we don't resort to them, or we don't engage them, we don't bring them in, and we would like to encourage conservation societies, but also looking back to oral traditions. And as for in the Chukis context, we're not a very direct culture. So we speak in metaphors. A lot of the practices are in metaphors. And how do we take how do we consider that? And I see a lot of discussion on education, outdoor classroom, which I think those are really great initiatives, and I think we can apply that here. I also would like to as like to encourage existing traditional schools. So, for instance, existing schools of language, which are actually rooted to the role of women as a matrilineal culture, as well as navigation, the schools of navigation, even though men are at the forefront, but it's also very much a women's knowledge space. And that's why it's also important to encourage existing traditional schools. And my worry is that, and this is again coming from the Turkish context, that we focus a lot of our finance on and education, which I totally support. But where is the role of cultural education? Where is the place of existing cultural schools? And I guess that's where those are a lot more questions raised than answers. And I believe that should be it for my part. Thank you.
Thank you, Mai Mai. That was wonderful. I really liked your comments about metaphors, because metaphors are so important in Pacific cultures and are so full of meaning and direction and guidance and so forth. So, when we think about, and metaphors are really about our environment, about what we see around us generally, and particularly in Pacific Island cultures. And also your comment about existing traditional schools. And I think that's a really valuable point about, within conservation and community development activities in the Federated States of Micronesia and in Chuuk, really trying to support those schools, or looking at what needs to be done and how to work with those existing schools. And I just wish there were more of you doing this kind of research, because it's so valuable. And if you look at the chat, you'll see there's just so many questions and comments about what the three of you have discussed. So that's really great. So if you want to take a look at the chat. So our program is completely changed now, because Aunofo is unable to get on. She's been trying, but somehow can't get rid of the pop-up blockers. And we've lost Benjamin Dixon, who's our PNG artist. So if it's okay with all of you, I would like to ask Andi Meretui a question. I've been trying to chat to you, Mere, unsuccessfully. Mere, are you still there? And could I ask you a question?
Please. Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear. So, Mere, based on your, oh, sorry, let me just introduce you very quickly. So Andi Meretui is from Deva Mountain, Tuva River Source, Vunamoli village in Nandi, Fiji. Her formative years were spent in Europe and Asia in British Army postings. She graduated from Victoria University, Wellington, and has been a very, very strong advocate for arts and heritage development in Fiji and the Pacific. She's worked on boards like the UNESCO World Heritage and Intangible Cultural Heritage safeguarding committees, and has been a member of our Commission on Environmental, Economic and Social Policy for many years, working on linkages with culture. She's also an aspiring politician, and we certainly hope she gets in the next election in Fiji. And so she's working with local communities on the conservation of natural and cultural heritage, and on natural resources as custodians. So Merre, thank you for joining us and for being willing to field my impromptu question. What I wanted to ask you is if you could talk a bit, based especially on your work with your local community and your village, and the fact that you even talk about, your mountain and your river. Can you tell us a bit about the relationship between cultural expressions that you see in Bunamoli and in Fiji and conservation and natural resource management? How do those work together? Naka.
Naka, thank you. Greetings, everybody. I'm here in Nandi on the western side of Fiji. So we're a lot hotter and drier. And my village is up in the mountains. So our association with the mountain, my mountain is Deva. When the airline pilots go past my village, they'll go, oh, there's Deva. That's the landmark for them. They know they're passing over. And so they acknowledge that's the mountain. And so our association with where we're from and our totems. My association with my totem is the chili, the red hot chili pepper. So when people introduce themselves, they'll say, "Oh, so you're from this place," and what the cultural connections are, and what your relationships are to each other. And the river is the River Tuva, the source that starts from the mountains and goes all the way down to the ocean. And so whatever happens up at the top of the mountain will affect those who are on the coast. And so we've had cases of flooding in Semo, where people are doing unsustainable forestry practices, and it affects those who are down on the coast. So people knowing about their environment and what the consequences are, and how it affects them. It's a more of a holistic approach. Now in our education system, things are sort of put into silos when you're learning about environment, and it's good to see the relationships or what is happening in other parts of the Pacific, because in Fiji's case, we have the program for UNESCO education for sustainable development. But what happens is things get siloed. So when we want to recognize our traditional practitioners who are the master weavers or carvers or artists, there's another whole bureaucratic process that sort of comes in and to get them recognized as the living human treasures, if you like, those who have the knowledge and passing that on. So it's one thing is on the ground in the communities, they're doing it, and to have the elders passing on the traditional knowledge of what they know to the children, because we're sort of caught up in the Western world of, okay, get onto the computers, learn about computers, but we're forgetting about going back to the basics. And this current situation with the pandemic has really changed the way things are done, and people are going back to relook at their traditional knowledge and what we should be knowing, going back to the plants that we know, and the weather patterns, and when we should plant, when we should be harvesting, things that in the past our elders would have passed on if they'd had the chance to pass it on. So really having that the intergenerational knowledge and the passing on the knowledge of the skills from the elders to the youth. So those are some of the things. And I think Benjamin was going to talk today, but I don't know, maybe something wrong with the IT, about the associations with his elders, how some of his work. I don't know if you can put some of his work up while I'm talking, instead of having me on. Just put some of his photos up and his artwork. You can see he's been inspired by his. He was telling us his grandfather or his grandparents and the stories and some of the traditional knowledge that they had in the past. I think we're going to see the screen in a minute for Benji, who's right up there. But yeah, passing on that knowledge before it's too late, before the elders leave us, and take whatever they have. So there's some of his work. So you know, the moon and what's going on in the moon, and the whole, you know, the holistic approach to the environment. So he's really been inspired by his elders. And I mean, one of the questions I was going to ask him was, you know, what some of the cultural connections, like that we have dolphin, turtle calling and shark calling in different parts of the Pacific. And as he and as an artist from Mumbai in Papua New Guinea, I was going to ask him, you know, how does he connect, or what is, and you can see in his work that connection there with the sea, the flora, the fauna, and the colors, very sort of vibrant. So and there's a lot of thought in his work, and as with many other artists. I hope I'm not going too fast for the interpreters, because I speak fast. But that the cultural connection and the way that they express themselves, the artists express themselves through the ocean, what's happening in the ocean. You see that some of the and some of the artwork there, and some of the conservation issues that we're having with the plastics. You know, how are they portraying that? It's all nice to have beautiful turtles and lovely environments and that, but what we're doing as humans, what are we doing? We have in our cultural connections, we're having lots of events. I've noticed a lot of events where people are saying, "Oh, we've got this COVID-19." We'll have functions, and so people, instead of sitting together, they'll take away plastic containers and creating more pollution into the ocean, which isn't really helping. So we should be looking at using more traditional weaving, going back and teaching traditional knowledge and weaving skills. So there's been a sort of over here an increase in teaching the baskets, the baskets made from coconut leaves, etc. All different art forms. So yeah, basket weaving, somebody should put there. Instead of using the plastic bags, now people are having the recyclable bags. But why not have more? Make use of the resources that are around us and pass that on from the elders to our children. Even for pottery makers, for one of the projects we're involved in, we have a pottery maker who's the soil that she takes from her river has slowly been disintegrating because you know, the developers are coming along. Oh, let's take the soil from there and use it for building. But she has a spiritual connection to the land, a sacred connection. It's where, you know, in olden days, in many places in the Pacific, we put our umbilical cord. We plant our umbilical cord to show our connection to the land. As I said, with the mountains, our rivers, how are we connected to the place as indigenous people of the Pacific? So the potters, you know, would take the soil, but they're finding that it's getting less and less. So how will they pass on the knowledge and their skills for traditional pottery making if their resources are being taken away from them? And it's across the board, you know, with our forests and our resources. I know that a place in Kambara that's famous for its wood carving. They were knocking down all the trees, and then now they're using the offcuts. But really sort of being creative about the way we use our resources and to be sustainable. But this lovely image here of Benjamin, I call him Benji, he's just inspired by what's going on around him in nature, and that's been through the passing down of traditional knowledge from his elders to himself, and the stories through chants. In some of his images, he was telling us about the chants when something is going. Sorry, when they're doing something, when he's painting, you know, the chanting, the communities, they tell the stories through the chants and of what's going on and what the future will predict. Nobody predicted this pandemic, we think, but in some of the chants, we hear it. And I see some of the comments coming up from banana stems, small bags, and, you know, yeah, let's use what's available, those resources that are around us. And people are doing it, but slowly, as was mentioned there, the banana bags, using stems, making use of everything, even in the food that the way we're using our food items. More people are going back to traditional farming methods. Maybe they've forgotten it. And because of this pandemic, it's been a wake-up call to go back and relook at our traditional knowledge. So yeah, I see there's a message there, so I better close up. Is that okay, Elise?
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Andy Merre, to fill in for both Benjamin and Arnulfo. Arnulfo has actually sent me a message, but I also wanted to, since we have questions to us. One anonymous attendee has asked, and I think this is a great question that any of the panelists could answer. What aspects of culture will build or erode resilience and conservation? So it's probably quite a big question, and maybe rather than what aspects is maybe how could culture build or erode resilience and conservation. Another question is related to Chuukese culture. So that would be for Mai, which is, given many outside organizations when working in Chuuk have a tendency to go and work with men and ignore the women, given Chuukese culture is matrilineal and women are the landowners, what can outside organizations, whether they're government or non-government, do to better include women? And how can proper cultural norms include women and not exclude them? So those two questions are out there. Mai, did you want to tackle that question first, and then we can go back to the role of culture in building or eroding resilience?
Yeah, I can try an attempt to answer to that question. We're fortunate that we have a Chuuk Women's Council and there's a space where you can engage with them and so like and they're pretty active and they're also very much involved in let's say they're pretty recognized by a lot of the organizations here and by the government as the representatives of women. But like I said, for outside organizations to come in because I said earlier, Chuuk is not this very direct culture. So sometimes it takes a while to really digest or really get information out of the local people and local communities. So it's really, I guess, it's really about knowing I wouldn't say the right people, but knowing the relations on the ground and having not the right contacts, but appropriate contacts for you to be able to carry out or engage with the women. And there's no organized, I don't have any organized suggestion other than there are existing women's groups, and one being the umbrella organization is the Chuuk Women Council. But I would also suggest really going through the community level and other in order to access information and engagement. I hope that helps. And sorry, I don't have much to add.
Thanks, Mai. I think that was a great response. Thank you very much. I'm aware that we have now run out of time. I just wanted to flag to all the participants that Arnulfo, who's the first woman Vaka captain and first woman captain in Tonga, will be giving a talk this afternoon or this evening, which is sort of in parallel to the conference, which is a talk where all the Vaka captains will be joining together for a Zoom conference, which is being organized from New Caledonia, where they've just built a traditional Vaka. And the question that we had for Aunofo was how we can use the traditional Vaka to really boost education and conservation for both young people and older people. So I will give the contact for that to Voter, and if those of you who are on here are interested in participating in that, please just get in touch with Voter. Voter, I think our time is up, or do we have a bit more time?
You have done a wonderful job, all of you. So I think we can wrap up here. Thank you.
Okay, I'm not sure exactly when we're going to get cut off, but I just wanted to take this time again to thank you so much, and Mark, Maimai, Mere, for being here today and answering all those questions. I'm hoping that this will be the beginning of a bigger conversation. As I said at the start, there's a lot of emphasis in the framework on the linkages between cultural heritage and natural heritage. But I think we really need to try to activate that more effectively and really bring in the cultural expressions dimension, which are so important in transmission of knowledge, and is what communities already have. That knowledge is there, and in some ways, I guess what I'm trying to express is that it needs to be activated, and I think that's what Anne and Mark and Mere and Maimai have been working on, and I hope that after this session, this is something that we can continue to build on, and with the participants who are interested in that particular area, to continue the conversation. So thank you very much to everyone who has joined. Sorry about the slight change in panelists, and look forward to hearing from you. We can network on the conference site if you're interested in that. I'm available, and I'm sure Mere, Anne, and Maimai, and Mark, even though everyone's very busy, I'm sure they would be very happy to continue the discussion. So thank you, everyone. Nakavakalevu, merci. And well, maybe we'll see you in the networking groups.